There is a kind of sadness that almost nobody knows how to explain because nothing dramatic ever happens when it begins. No one walks away. No one says they have stopped caring. There is no moment that gives you permission to say something has ended. Everything looks ordinary. Life continues. The same places still feel familiar. The same conversations still happen. The same people are still there. Yet somewhere beneath those ordinary moments, something begins changing so quietly that you only recognize it after it has already become part of your everyday life. At first, you ignore the feeling because it seems unreasonable to question something that has not obviously fallen apart. You tell yourself that this is simply what happens when people become comfortable with each other. The excitement settles. Life becomes busy. Responsibilities grow heavier. You repeat these explanations because they make sense, and for a while they are enough to silence the voice inside you that keeps whispering that something is different. But emotions have a strange way of noticing what logic cannot. You begin feeling the difference long before you can describe it. You remember a time when your presence carried a kind of quiet importance. Not because anyone constantly reminded you, but because you never had to wonder whether you mattered. It was there in the way someone listened without appearing distracted. It was there in conversations that never seemed rushed. It was there in the comfort of knowing that simply being together was enough to make an ordinary afternoon feel meaningful. Looking back, those moments never felt extraordinary while they were happening. They only became precious after they slowly disappeared. The painful part is that change rarely arrives all at once. It hides inside repetition. One ordinary day becomes another until the things that once felt special quietly become expected. You are still kind. You are still patient. You are still the person who remembers the little details, who notices when something feels wrong before anyone else says a word, who stays a little longer because leaving too soon never feels right. None of those things change. What changes is how invisible they gradually become. You never expected appreciation to be constant. That was never the point. But there is a difference between someone becoming familiar with your presence and someone slowly forgetting what your presence once meant to them. That difference is almost impossible to explain because it is built from moments that seem too small to matter. A conversation that ends a little earlier than it used to. A silence that no longer feels shared. A smile that looks the same but somehow feels different. Nothing hurts enough to confront, yet everything hurts enough to stay with you. So you begin searching for reassurance without realizing that is what you are doing. You pay closer attention than you used to. You wonder whether the warmth you feel today is the same warmth that once came so naturally. You start comparing the present with memories you never intended to revisit so often. Sometimes you convince yourself that nothing has changed at all. Then another ordinary moment quietly reminds you why you started questioning everything in the first place. The hardest battles are often fought against uncertainty because uncertainty never gives you an answer. It only gives you possibilities. Maybe you are imagining it. Maybe you are expecting too much. Maybe everything is fine. Or maybe the connection that once felt effortless has slowly become something both of you are simply maintaining because neither of you knows exactly when it changed. Living inside those questions is exhausting. Not because you enjoy overthinking, but because your heart keeps noticing things your mind desperately wants to dismiss. Without realizing it, your own behavior begins changing. You become slower to express disappointment because you do not want to create distance where none might actually exist. You choose your words more carefully than before. You begin convincing yourself that some feelings are easier to carry alone than to explain to someone else. Every small compromise feels harmless while you are making it, yet together they begin shaping a quieter version of who you are. You laugh even when your thoughts are somewhere else because you do not want anyone asking what is wrong. You tell yourself that bringing up the same feelings again would only make things heavier, so you carry them silently instead. Over time, silence becomes easier than honesty, not because honesty has lost its value, but because you are afraid of what it might reveal if spoken aloud. Months pass, and one afternoon you suddenly notice something that has nothing to do with the other person. You notice yourself. You notice how carefully you have learned to exist. You hesitate before speaking. You apologize for things that do not require an apology. You dismiss your own disappointment before anyone else has the chance to. You become so focused on protecting the relationship that you quietly stop protecting the parts of yourself that once made you feel alive. That realization is difficult to face because no one asked you to disappear. You simply became so afraid of losing what mattered to you that you slowly convinced yourself that becoming easier to understand, easier to live with, and easier to disappoint was the safest way to keep the connection from slipping any further away. And that is often the moment people begin missing the version of themselves they never realized they were leaving behind. You rarely notice yourself changing while it is happening because every change feels so small that it hardly seems worth remembering. You let one disappointment pass because it is not important enough to mention. A few days later, you let another one pass for the same reason. Then another. Eventually, silence becomes a habit instead of a decision. You stop expecting to be understood because expecting less feels safer than being disappointed again. From the outside, nothing appears different. You are still there. You still care. You still show up. But inside, something has become noticeably quieter. The strange thing is that people often believe loneliness only exists when they are physically alone. They imagine empty rooms, quiet evenings, and long stretches without another voice nearby. Yet some of the deepest loneliness is experienced while sitting beside someone who once made you feel completely seen. You look across the room and realize you have spent the entire evening listening, smiling, responding, and being present, but somehow you leave with the feeling that almost nobody noticed you were there in the first place. You start remembering little things that never seemed important before. You remember how easily conversations used to drift into places neither of you planned to go. Hours disappeared without either of you noticing. There was never any pressure to make the moment interesting because simply sharing it already felt enough. Now conversations often end the moment there is nothing practical left to say. The silence that follows no longer feels peaceful. It feels unfinished, as though something that once connected the two of you has quietly stopped reaching the other side. The hardest part is that you cannot ask someone to notice you the way they once did. You cannot request genuine curiosity. You cannot remind someone to look at you with the same warmth they once carried so naturally. Those things either happen on their own or they do not. Realizing that leaves you standing in a place where effort suddenly feels powerless. No amount of trying can recreate something that was once effortless. So you begin trying somewhere else. You become kinder. More patient. More understanding. You tell yourself that perhaps everyone goes through difficult seasons. Perhaps they are carrying burdens you cannot see. Perhaps this distance has nothing to do with you at all. Those thoughts come from a place of compassion, and there is nothing wrong with compassion. But somewhere along the way, compassion quietly becomes permission to ignore your own feelings. Every explanation you find for someone else's behavior becomes another reason to postpone listening to your own heart. Days become weeks, and weeks quietly become months. You adapt so gradually that one morning you wake up and realize you have forgotten what it feels like to express disappointment without feeling guilty. You cannot remember the last time you spoke honestly without first wondering how your words might be received. Even happiness begins feeling restrained because some part of you has become used to measuring every emotion before allowing it to exist. Then something unexpected happens. You come across an old memory. Maybe it is a familiar place. Maybe it is a song you had not heard in years. Maybe it is nothing more than the way sunlight falls across a room on an ordinary afternoon. Suddenly you remember who you used to be before uncertainty became such a constant companion. You remember laughing without wondering whether anyone else would laugh with you. You remember speaking because you wanted to be heard, not because you were carefully choosing the safest words. You remember feeling comfortable enough to be completely yourself without quietly asking for permission through every sentence you spoke. That memory stays with you because it forces you to ask a question you have been avoiding for far too long. When did I become this careful? Not careful with my time. Not careful with my responsibilities. Careful with my own existence. It is a painful question because there is no single answer waiting for you. There is only the realization that little by little, you started making yourself smaller in places where you once felt free to take up space. You accepted less enthusiasm because at least there was still some warmth. You accepted less curiosity because at least conversations still happened. You accepted less closeness because convincing yourself it was enough felt easier than admitting how deeply you missed what once came naturally. One day you look at the person you have become and recognize something you never intended to learn. You have become incredibly good at surviving emotional distance. You know how to smile through conversations that leave you feeling empty. You know how to convince yourself that everything is fine while quietly carrying questions that never receive answers. You know how to tell other people you are simply tired when the truth is that you have become exhausted from pretending not to notice what your heart has been trying to tell you for so long. The most painful part is not realizing that another person has changed. It is realizing how much you changed trying not to lose them. Somewhere between protecting the relationship and protecting yourself, you quietly forgot that both were supposed to matter. There comes a point when you stop looking for a single moment to blame because you finally understand that some changes are too quiet to leave behind a clear beginning. They happen while life is being lived. They happen between ordinary mornings, familiar evenings, and conversations that seem completely normal until you look back and realize they no longer felt the way they once did. You spend so much time searching for the exact day everything changed that you almost miss the truth standing quietly in front of you. The distance was never created in one moment. It was built little by little, until one day it simply became the new reality. That realization hurts because it forces you to let go of an illusion you have been protecting for a long time. You keep believing that if you could only find the right words, the right conversation, or the right explanation, everything would return to the way it used to be. But some things cannot be restored by repeating the past. They can only be understood for what they became. Perhaps that is why so many people carry invisible sadness they never speak about. Not because they lost someone completely, but because they slowly lost the feeling of being deeply known. There is a difference between someone being present in your life and someone truly seeing you. One can exist without the other, and that is what makes this kind of loneliness so difficult to describe. You are surrounded by familiarity, yet you quietly miss being recognized. The strange part is that you do not even realize how much you have been waiting until one small moment catches you off guard. Someone asks if you are all right, and for a second you almost tell the truth. You almost admit that you are tired of pretending everything feels the same when it clearly does not. You almost explain how exhausting it is to carry questions that have no clear answers. But instead, the words stay where they always have. You smile. You say you are fine. And the conversation moves on. Later that evening, when everything becomes quiet again, you begin thinking about the person you used to be. Not the younger version of yourself, but the version that laughed without measuring every reaction, spoke without rehearsing every sentence, and believed that feeling understood did not have to be earned over and over again. You realize that the person you miss the most is not always the one standing on the other side of the relationship. Sometimes, the person you miss is the version of yourself that slowly disappeared while trying to keep everything from falling apart. That is the quiet tragedy of becoming too available. It is not that kindness loses its value. It is not that loyalty stops mattering. It is that somewhere along the way, you become so focused on always being there that you forget to ask whether you still feel alive inside the relationship you have been protecting. You become dependable, reliable, predictable, and endlessly understanding, until one day you wonder whether people still appreciate those qualities or have simply grown accustomed to them. Maybe that is why this feeling is so difficult to explain to anyone who has never lived through it. From the outside, there is nothing dramatic to point toward. There are no unforgettable arguments, no obvious betrayals, and no single memory that explains everything. There are only hundreds of ordinary moments that quietly change their meaning over time. That is why this kind of pain often stays hidden. It is built from things that seem too small to justify heartbreak, yet together they become heavy enough to change the way you see yourself. And perhaps the hardest realization of all is understanding that becoming forgettable rarely happens in a single day. It happens every time you convince yourself that your feelings can wait. Every time you choose silence because it feels easier than honesty. Every time you accept a little less connection while telling yourself it is only temporary. Little by little, you stop asking to be understood and start settling for simply being included. Without noticing, you begin expecting less from the people who once made you feel like you never had to question your place in their lives. Then one day you wake up and understand that what you have been grieving was never only the relationship. You have been grieving the quiet loss of a version of yourself that believed being loved also meant being deeply noticed. A version that never questioned whether their presence mattered because they could feel the answer without asking. Maybe that is why this story feels so familiar. Not because every relationship ends this way, but because almost everyone, at some point in life, has looked at someone they deeply cared about and silently wondered when simply being there stopped feeling like enough. If these words felt like they were describing a chapter of your own life, subscribe for more stories that give a voice to the emotions we rarely know how to explain.